Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another tag video. This is the BookTube Top Tens Books tag created by Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. I'll leave a link to his video down below. And I was tagged by Doris over at All the Books. Link to her video, of course, also down below. And if you don't know Doris or Jason, please go check them out and subscribe. Now, Jason invented this tag in order to sort of see which 10 books booktubers like most. He's keeping stats and he will probably publish the results. And I decided to do this tag now, even though I have a backlog of older tags. But from what I understand from Doris's video, this is the last a month or so in which we can, submit our books for Jason stats. So anyway, you have to choose 10 books that are your, at the moment at least, your all-time favorite books, and you also have to rank them from 10 to 1 because books get more points if they are number 1 or something like that. Anyway, so I picked 10 books and it's a bit arbitrary because it's a mood thing when I picked those books yesterday, but those are for the moment my top 10 books. And at number 10, I picked an old favorite of mine, and that is François Sagan's novel La Shimada. This is my very battered old copy of the book. When I was a teenager, I loved François Sagan's work. I read all her books and all of them 20 times at least. But I had to pick one because you can only pick one book. So I picked this one because this was always my favorite. It was published in 1965. François Sagan was born in 1935 and she became famous very young when she published Bonjour Tristesse when she was 18. Now, this book, as most of François Sagan's books, is set in France, in Paris, during the 1960s. And you have your main character, Lucille, who is a 20-ish, beginning of 30s woman, a bit adrift, who doesn't work. She lives with this older man, very rich, and then she falls in love. And yeah, it's not a very special story, but I loved François Sagan's writing, and I loved this was one of the books when I was a teenager that felt like she gets me. This woman, being adrift, not knowing really what to do with your life, that just spoke to me on a very deep level. So I had to include at least one book by Sagan on my list. The second book is also something from the past, although a little later than the first one. I was in my early 20s when I read it, and that is Alice Walker's famous novel, The Color Purple. Alice Walker, an African-American writer, and with this book she won the Pulitzer Prize in 1983, and she was the first African-American writer to do so. Now, you're probably all familiar with the story. The book is set in the deep south of the US between the wars, and we follow our main character, Seelen. She's 14 when the book opens, and we follow her life story. She writes letters to God to tell him her story, and it's a story about abuse, about racial discrimination, but also about love and hope. I think this was probably the first book that really told me something about race and sexism against Black women, that spoke to me in a way that I could process and that I could understand something. So even though this book is, decades old, it still holds a very, very special place in my heart, and I wanted it to be on this list. The next one is a jump in time. It's a book published in 2003, and that is a memoir, Azar Nafizi's memoir, Reading Lolita in Tehran. Azar Nafizi is a teacher. She now lives in the US. She immigrated from Tehran, but this book is set in the 1990s in Tehran after the so-called revolution, where women are restricted and it's not allowed to read certain books, certainly not a book like Nabokov's Lolita. And Nafizi organizes private sessions with 7 young women where they read and they talk about life and books. And we follow not only Azar Nafisi's life, but also the life of these women. I thought it was a harrowing tale, and even if you don't like Lolita, you should still read this book. I'm talking to you, Sean, because it really is gripping and harrowing, and it tells you something about life in Iran in the 1990s. On to number 7 on my list, and that is translated fiction from the French author Delphine de Vigan. Her book, based on a true story, translated from the French by George Miller, first published in France in 2015. I love Delphine de Vigan's work, and I had to pick one again, and I picked this one. It's a set in present time, and we have a character that resembles Delphine de Vigan, a successful writer, Delphine, who just published a memoir, and she's struggling with what is real and what is not real, because people assume everything in the memoir is real, and that is her whole life. And then she meets a woman referred to only as Elle, and they become friends, but it goes sour really quickly. It's a story with a lot of ideas, like French writers do, about truth, about memory, and I was really gripped by this story, and it made me think. It's also about the book itself, like what happened, what really happened, but also in a broader context, like what is the truth about our life. So I love this book, and I hope if you haven't read it that you will pick it up. And at number 6, I picked a collection, because with short stories and poems you can pick collections, and I picked this one, The Portable Dorothy Parker, because Dorothy Parker, an early 20th century writer, American writer, is one of my all-time favorite wisecrack writers. She wrote poems, essays, short stories, and she is absolutely fantastic. She has a language intuition and a wit and intelligence in her stories and poems that is just absolute and unparalleled. I regularly return to her work, and if you have never read anything by her, you are really, really missing out. On to spot number 5, and I picked this tome by A.S. Byatt, a famous English writer. You all know, of course, the children's book, which was published in 2009, and it's my favorite A.S. Byatt of all time. The book opens in 1895 in England, and it spans the life of a family and their friends all through the turn of the century up until the end of the First World War. We go from England to Paris to Munich and back to England. It's breathtaking. It's quite a slow start where you are in the museum, and there's a lengthy description of the embroidery and the museum, and then it takes up speed and pace, and there are a lot of characters, but A.S. Byatt handles them all really well, and there is the absolute best scene about war and what it means to come back from war that I've ever read in my entire life. And in at number 4, we stay with the theme of war, is Aminata Forna's novel The Hired Man, published in 2013. Now, Aminata Forna was born in Glasgow, but she grew up in Sierra Leone, where her father is from, and The Hired Man is set in a small village in Croatia after the Yugoslavian wars. You have our main character, Laura, is an English woman who comes there with her daughter, Grace. They bought a little house and they want to renovate it as a vacation house. And so Laura hires Büro, a man from the village, and through their encounters, we learn about Büro's past and about how the war affected this village and is still affecting it. It's about the ghosts of the past that are slowly revealed in a beautifully written novel that really captures the haunting of war and what it means to the people of this small village. And we are on the top 3 already. And number 3, if you're following me, you're not surprised that this book is on my list, because I gush about it all the time. And that is Mary Doria Russell's sci-fi novel, The Sparrow, first published in 1996. And if you haven't read it, You should read it, especially now, because the book is set in 2019. It opens with our main character, Emilio Santos, a Jesuit priest who just returned to Earth from a mission to the planet Rakat that was discovered some years earlier and has life, extraterrestrial life. And the Jesuits put together a mission, 8 people, to travel to that planet and to explore it. When Emilio comes back after the mission, he is the only survivor. That's not a spoiler. You will learn that right in the beginning. And he is mentally and physically and psychologically a complete wreck. And we then learn what went wrong on this mission when the 8 people coming from Earth encounter the original population of Rakat. This is a highly political sci-fi book about what it means to encounter a different culture, what it means, what colonialism means, but mainly what it means when 2 cultures clash and you do not, as humans, understand the other culture and to what kind of violence and horrible consequences it leads when out of goodwill but naivete and not knowing anything, you engage with these people. It's fantastically written. It's a harrowing story, not an easy tale, certainly not, but I love this book to pieces. Number 2. And that it was quite a struggle because I wanted to include diaries in my top 10 because I love reading diaries, especially diaries from writers. Virginia Woolf's diaries, I love them. But there are multiple others, Susan Sontag, and I had to pick one, and I decided to pick Sylvia Plath's unabridged journals published in 2000. Now, Sylvia Plath, an American poet and writer who committed suicide when she was quite young in 1963. These journals first published as in an unabridged version because there were journals published in 1982 but heavily abridged by Sylvia Plath's husband. So this one is the unabridged version and it covers the years in the 1950s, the whole decade of the 1950s when Plath was at university studying English, when she met her husband, Ted Hughes, whom she married in 1956, all the way up until the end of the decade. And I love reading them, like I said, and I especially love because these journals are really covering everyday life. The entries are quite extensive when she tells us about her dates, about her studies, about her anxieties, and you really get a glimpse of what her life was like for her during that decade. So if you're interested in Sylvia Plath, I can certainly recommend that you read this volume of unabridged journals. And number 1 spot goes to Edith Wharton, The Age of Innocence, published in 1920. The book and the film, you probably all know the story. That it's set in the 1870s in New York. And our main character, or at least it starts in the 1870s because it spans almost a whole lifetime. Our main character, Newland Archer, is a young man in his early 30s from the upper class New York society. He's a lawyer, but he doesn't really have to work that much. He's engaged to a proper young lady from the same society, and then he meets Ellen Olanska, who came back from Europe to New York after she left her Polish abusive husband. And they fall in love, and then you have this whole quest whether you should follow expectations, whether you should follow what society expects for you and the limits society sets for choosing your own life, or whether you should follow your own path like Ellen did. What I love especially about this book and why I chose now to put it in the number 1 spot are 2 things. The first thing is the language. This book is so beautifully written that it took my breath away. It's like you can almost taste the language in your mouth, so beautiful. And the second thing that I really love about the book is that it has this timeless quality, even though it gives a really good account of the time it is set in. But this dualism, that you get a good portrayal of the 1870s in New York, but it still has a timeless quality because of the themes that it explores. Expectations from parents or society or family or friends is a theme that is absolutely timeless. We have that in the 21st century, just as they had it in the 1870s, albeit that the expectations are different, but still that theme is completely timeless. So those are the reasons that I picked this book as my number one spot. And I did this all under 20 minutes. I'm so proud of myself. Anyway, these were my top 10 books for Jason's BookTube Top Tens Tag. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, let me know down in the comments what you thought about the books, whether you read any of the books that I mentioned, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Bye-bye.